And we're back. This is not a very fun chapter, but boy, it's relevant. And it's not understood very well, even by people who write news stories. I remember having a violent argument at an honors party years ago with a political scientist that dealt with a major theme here, nature versus nurture. And he was just obsessed with me telling him which was more important, nature or nurture. And for him, more important was 51 versus 49. And we just could not communicate on this issue. And I think after I left the house a day or two later, it dawned on me why. He was a political scientist, and he used to think about elections. And 51-49 means 51 wins and takes over the government, and 49 goes away. Boy, is that not the way this world works. These twins are quadruplets. Are very interesting, depressing, and they point out the importance of genes, but they also point out the importance of the environment. And there's the issue of genetic determinism, which is what my political scientist was obsessed with. And there's the issue of nature versus nurture. We didn't really discuss this in relation to your autonomic nervous system, but most phenomena that are related to either are controlled simultaneously by both. If you look at the size of your pupil, that's a balancing act between the two. It's some amount of one and some amount of the other, and that's typically the way genes in the environment work. These are variables that we can look at in terms of those two issues, but virtually always, whatever you're thinking about is influenced by both. And here are basic genetic facts. And there's our friend the cell and the nucleus and chromosome pairs and nucleotides. Proteins are going to be important here. Traits, we demonstrate traits. Proteins are incredibly complex. How they fold up is a target of active research. And it used to be that you could invest screen saving time on your computer to help figure out protein folding issues. Really complex and very important to the functioning of a normal protein. And nothing else there overly confusing. And amino acids and proteins, and they're folded up. Shape is really, really important. This basic discussion of DNA that you had in high school, nucleotides, types of amino acids, and we only make 20 amino acids, but boy, we do a lot with them. And you can view the DNA as a recipe, But the cook, the environment, is also certainly important. And fertilization is important and is politically important. And when I teach my behavioral neuroscience course, what's in B here is important. And I just have people repeat over and over like a mantra: DNA, RNA, protein synthesis, DNA, RNA, protein synthesis. And RNA, of course, is in the news a lot these days because I don't know what vaccine you've gotten. If you've gotten one, I hope you do. My vaccine was one of the two that's based on RNA. It's the coming thing. They were working on this for decades, but they really pounded it out when COVID came along. And I'm guessing those are Kardashians. Sure, they're Kardashians. Genes with slightly different instructions are making the same protein are alleles. And that's an important concept. And is this the one about deafness? No, that comes later, I think, but it's related. So it graphically represents how sexual reproduction, which there's been debate about why we do this. It seems so complicated. There are organisms that just send off buds, little clones of themselves. But sexual reproduction really keeps things jumbled up, and that's good. In terms of evolution, mutations are important, and usually they're random. But what's amazing about Darwin is he didn't know about genes. He didn't know about Mendel, who will be discussed later in the chapter. And mutations are usually not so great, but occasionally they are great, and they can be selected for because of how they affect behavior or the body. Right. So there it is. There's the box. So there's the original gene with mutations, and mutations are usually bad, and then they go away. But a mutation that isn't bad, natural selection can act on actually by making people die because they have bad physical or behavioral traits. That's natural selection too. Natural selection has no end goal. It's not intelligent, but it designs things that look to some people as if they were intelligently designed. That's a very good little box. And the difference between your genotype and phenotype is important. And certainly you should know the difference between those two. And then we get into a hot topic, not here, but a little bit later, how the environment interacts with your genes. And that's me on the far right of that panel. And dominant and recessive genes, and here we go. With Mendel, whose work was lost for quite a while after he published his little paper, and Darwin had no idea about it, and it was rediscovered later. He picked peas, which was a good thing to pick, Somebody later convinced him to use something else. I forgot what it was. But if he had chosen that other organism earlier on, he never would have found what he did. And the issue of dominant and recessive, and there's a nice figure there. And Darwin and a lot of people thought that whatever heritability was like mixing paints. But you mix gray with gray and you get more gray. And mixing paints can't explain why sometimes a recessive trait like white flour just bam comes back in its full glory. But Mendel's system was able to deal with that. I feel bad that Mendel never really got the recognition he deserved in his lifetime, but we appreciate it now. And when I teach about genes in my behavioral neuroscience class, I used to talk about time and temperature signs, which I don't even know if you know what they are, but they used to be on banks. There were a bunch of little white lights, and depending on what little lights you turned on, you could either tell the temperature or what time it was. You're looking at a computer screen. It's a bunch of lights. They're not white. They're red, blue, and green. You turn them all on, you get white. You turn them all off, you get black. That's not very useful. But you turn on subsets, and you can read the material in the textbook if you wish. Gene expression. Think about that for a while. Yeah, there's something else. The genes in virtually all the cells of your body are the same, but they don't do the same thing. They express themselves differently, and we get different tissues. And the book tries to deal with the myth that blue-eyed parents can't have brown-eyed children, which I'm sure has led to some divorces. That belief system. It ain't necessarily so, or I mean, it's definitely not so. And the environment can affect gene expression, and there's a discussion of that. And the phenomenon of epigenetics, or the concept of epigenetics, is huge right now. You see it in the popular press all the time. And researchers are working on it all the time. It's important. And I've worked with inbred strains of mice. I went to grad school in Maine, which was very close to Bahaba, as we said back then, and the Jackson Labs, which is the largest mammalian genetics research facility on Earth, and they inbreed mice. And the inbred mice, I'm going to say it, but I don't understand it. When you have an inbred strain, they are more closely related than identical twins. And some of the mice in this chapter I've worked with. C57 blacks, yes. I've worked with C57 blacks. And we were breeding mice in both when the animal facilities were in Alumni Memorial and then later in the Loyola Science Center. Lots of breeding. And very interesting research. And I won't go over this in part, but it deals with C57 blacks that were raised by other mice moms or the same mom, and they show the influence of both environment and genes on behavior. Very important. It's a little befuddling to first-time readers, but it's huge. I wish I could remember the name of the book on the history of inbreeding. How long ago was this done? Chicken coops and coal stoves were used for some of the breeding. It's pretty fundamental and pretty magical. The Jackson Labs keep burning down because Bar Harbor is an island and fire sweeps across it, which is why the wealthy people moved out. But I'm a big fan of Jackson Labs. This picture, this is what I wanted to do when I was in grad school. I wanted to study environmental enrichment. I don't agree with these categories very much. I mean, I'm a believer in evolution, and certainly impoverished. The animals living alone, that's not natural, but the animals living in a cage with one other partner, that's not natural either. You want normal, it's what is called enrichment. And so both of them are impoverished. And what's unusual here is higher is worse, because this is a graph of number of errors. And you get a big difference in the standard environment. Not so much if you enrich, and not so much if you impoverish. So it shows the importance of environment. Environment doesn't control everything, but it certainly controls some things. It can modify some things. And single gene effects on behavior and Huntington's. Look at those brain scans. By the way, they're probably MRIs, not CAT scans. And you can see the picture of the patient with Huntington's. Their ventricles are ginormous, sort of like you leave a donut out and the ants come and eat it. The middle of the donut gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You can also see the cerebral cortex has bigger creases. There's a sad story about a researcher who she's mentioned down here, and who did research on this by going to a place that had the Dr. Nancy Wexler, a psychologist. Huntington's was in her family, and she went and studied this village where the rate of Huntington disease was very high. And her research led to the discovery of the Huntingtin gene and the development of a test that could tell you whether or not you carry the gene. It's dominant, so if you've got it, you're in trouble. Interestingly, at least initially, after the gene was discovered, she decided to not be tested. I don't know if she ever decided to be tested. It's a very, very good documentary on her. I looked for it, but I could not find it. So there's a discussion of PKU and folded proteins, and PKU in the United States, in most places, children or infants are tested for this. If you
According to Cedars-Sinai, all newborn babies in the U.S. are screened for PKU with a blood test. If you adopt a child from another country, he or she may need to be screened for PKU and other genetic diseases.
Thank you. That's an important piece of information. It's easy to deal with PKU. You go on a low phenylalanine diet. But boy, if you don't go on that diet, bad things happen. And there's a picture of a cute little child debating what to eat. She eats fruit and protein-free rice, pasta without cheese, and her development will be normal. Her life will be normal. Green color blindness test. I had a lab assistant who I didn't know had red-green color blindness, and I had a rat's nest of wires that were all color-coded, and I cut them apart and told him to put them back together, and then he admitted that he had color blindness. But oddly, if you told him what the color was in a situation, he could still see it. Pilots are tested for this. Most people live with it and sometimes don't even know they have it. But in some situations, it comes out. I meant to do this before. I'm a little vague. Here it is, the Ishihara color test. And there are some images. And the issue is, can you see the numbers embedded in the figure? These used to be produced by hand way back in the day. My understanding was, or at least there was a lot of physical labor involved. But if you wonder about whether you can see all the colors in the rainbow, and we'll get to that later in the course, you may take a look at a couple of these. It's a pretty magical test. And okay, here's the deafness, right? Yes, and how mixing of alleles can mean that all the children are okay, even though both parents have deafness. And then are we controlled? And the absolute truth is we're not controlled, but they're important. And Hatfields-McCoys. Some people in the South are pretty territorial and aggressive, and some of that is related to the culture, and some of it may be related to genes. And as the book points out, some journalists have little scientific background, and ain't that the truth? Some physicians are basically, they know the technology of medicine, but they don't think very much about the science. So how to do science is important for citizens to know, and physicians to know, and reporters to know. And here we go with multiple genes. This is very complicated. Back in the chapter on how we do research, I hope I mentioned that correlational research is very difficult to do, and it's not for the non-clever. And this is what we're stuck with. We look at whether people have schizophrenia, and we can sometimes look at identical and fraternal twins, and sometimes adoption studies. But this is heavy stuff. And there's terms over there on the left: monozygotic twins, dizygotic twins. And there's a figure coming up, not in this page, the next one. But schizophrenia keeps coming up in this chapter. Heritability, it is defined a little bit later, so I'll wait for that. But the lifetime risk of developing schizophrenia from monozygotic twins is pretty darn high. It's still, not 100%. Nature and nurture always interact, but boy, there's strong evidence for heritability. And even if you have relatives that are schizophrenia, have schizophrenia, the probabilities go up. Another one that shows this kind of pattern is bipolar disorder. So there's an interesting graphic on monozygotic and dizygotic, and whether or not you are living alone or with a partner closely physically connected to you in the womb. And the monozygotics are more environmentally the same, not just genetically, but environmentally. That's an important issue. And there are the twins, cute as buttons, really depressing about the father. Really, really depressing. We say it's heritable if it's influenced by one or more genes. A more formal definition of heritability is an estimate of the variation of a trait in the population that arises from differences in genes. Say that over and over. It won't make sense the first 4 or 5 times, but it will make more sense as you keep repeating it and think about the data in this or the reviews in this charitable chapter, and there it is defined over on the left. So if a trait doesn't vary in a population, you get a heritability estimate of, well, you can't do it. There has to be variability. What doesn't it mean? And there's an intelligent discussion here. That table there from Bouchard, 2002, for me is very important. I don't think I've looked at the Epstein 2010, but I was doing research actually related to Mark Breedlove's research on personality, and I'm very interested in political orientation as well. And pro-social behaviors, pretty high heritability. Empathy, which goes along with pro-social, pretty high heritability. Aggression, moderate. And then there's social attitudes, conservatism, liberalism, pretty heritable. Religiousness, less. What religion you believe in, that's largely an accident of birth. And then, later in the course, we're going to deal with personality. There's good science to personality. The big 5 personality traits are listed here. You don't have to know them, but they're pretty heritable. The highest being extroversion, which is related to being openness. Openness and extroversion, both of those are related to being liberal minded. And cute as buttons, but that's die. Adoption studies, twins raised together, twins raised apart. There's also really good research on this with intelligence. Adopted children, when they're with their adoptive families, their IQs are pretty well correlated. But when they are released into the world, their relationship, their IQ drifts to correlate better with the IQs of their biological parents. I'll tell you, liberals don't like that one, but I can't change the data. Stress, really important study. The rate of schizophrenia is higher in big cities. And there's a very nice figure. And this is where we talk about the children and their evil parent, father. I can't stand even look at that. And genes and environment interact. That's a simple figure that you're not meant to memorize, but you should get the big picture. So genes that favor schizophrenia, few or more. So if you don't have many, you're pretty well off no matter what kind of environment you're in. But as you have accumulated more genes that are important for the development of schizophrenia, you're more likely to move into the range where you develop mild or severe schizophrenia. Again, environment and genes interact a lot. So this is importance of parenting. Moms are always getting blamed for everything, and this is a mom story here. And if you've ever watched Rats and Mice deal with their pups, the moms, licking is often a very important thing, and that's important for development. And that's it for that chapter. So, know the Muse story and the very depressing story of the quadruplets, depressing both genetically and in terms of evil dad. So, I don't think this is a fun chapter. It's a critically important chapter. And by the way, this is part of your author, Mark Breedlove's powerhouse. His research dealt with the interaction between genes and behavior. And boy, is he bright. And we will say goodbye for this one.